Alright everyone, it's time to refute the unity message being peddled right now by the neolibs and by certain Republicans, as opposed to the disunity message, you could say, of the far left and the far right, plus the MAGA populace, which it's not really far right so much, it's a refutation of the mainline GOP in the partisan sense at this point, for backstabbing Donald Trump. Here's the problem. It goes back to something I've been talking about now since the early 2010s, which is that the political paradigm that we see today is the result of an old establishment, a globalistic establishment of neoliberals and neocons that are basically the same, and the problem is that their message of let's keep going the way we're going doesn't work. The reason why you have increasingly far-left violence in U.S. cities, Antifa and BLM and so forth burning down Wendy's, the reason why you had the Capitol riot, the reason why you have Trump being elected in the first place, the reason why Bernie Sanders briefly, although not realistically, looked at least to some people like he was potentially a viable candidate. The reason why you have these things happening is that the establishment has alienated a large segment of the population, I would argue over 50% of it, and no longer has a mandate to govern. The problem is that the unity message of people like Biden, or at this point like the McConnells and stuff, it's the same status quo that didn't work before that led to the situation we have now today. The reason why you have an upswelling MAGA populism, the establishment at this point, at least unofficially, of a Patriot Party sort of thing, the reason why you have more Antifa and BLM going on, the reason why you have the Gang of Four with AOC and Ilhan Omar and stuff not really working with the Democratic majority at all times, the reason why you have these things is the natural stress on the population that's the result of globalism. That's what's happening. Essentially, the idea of unity a la Beijing Biden or the Bushes or people like that, the globalists, is the old status quo that didn't work. Big banks will get bailouts. Funny money will be printed into oblivion. We will strike trade deals that don't really benefit the United States and just allow foreign entities to abuse our people. The middle and working class will be eroded. U.S. industry sent overseas. We'll have a NIMBY environmental mentality, so instead of telling people to plant trees and pick up garbage, we'll just send our heavy industry to China, and because it's out of sight, out of mind, the lemmings will actually believe it. With increasing attacks on liberty, on privacy, censorship online, mass surveillance, headhunting after journalists that conduct themselves in the manner of whistleblowers, to the point where they have to flee to other countries, sometimes tin-horn nations, because they're getting abused by the U.S. government. That's the status quo. That is the post-Reagan globalistic status quo. By the way, Reagan is not entirely non-culpable in this. In his second term, he began ushering in proto-globalism already. It just sort of gets solidified by H.W. and Clinton. Worked kind of okay for a while until the end of the Soviet Union and the rise of the internet, and now we're reaping mostly negative rewards. Bush and Obama were the big promulgators of this kind of situation. It's highly centralized, very authoritarian. Huge fusion between corporations and banks and the U.S. and other governments, fusion between the U.S. and other governments, even in the post-military sense of just these non-stop trade deals that really they always boil down to corporations having a better bottom line and their workers getting some breadcrumbs as a result of that, and that's basically it. Essentially, and this I don't even think is necessarily at all times on purpose, it's essentially the stamping out of upward mobility for the lower classes. That's the old status quo. Well, nobody wants that. It doesn't work for the poor. They get breadcrumbs. It doesn't work for the working class. They get smushed down into poverty. Like if we end up with a $15 an hour national minimum wage, they've got that for federal workers, which is a little bit different. If you end up with that minimum wage, you're taking the very poor. They're still the very poor. They're still making minimum wage. You've just taken people that were a little bit ahead of that. They're making like $17 an hour. They're like, well, I can get by on this. Now they're basically one step above the poverty line. That's the only thing you've done. You've equalized the lower classes. You haven't actually helped anyone. you haven't. The costs will rise accordingly. If anything, you've hurt the poor. That's what'll happen with it. I realize the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and it's difficult to convince people because they're economically illiterate why it's a bad idea to do that, because they think, well, we're giving more money to the poor. Well, no, you're not. You're going to make some of them unemployed outright. Just so you are aware, there will be a transitory period with much higher unemployment as the economy adjusts accordingly. It will not help anyone. It will not uplift a single person. The poor will still be poor. There will always be people that are on the bottom. Uplifting them just brings them up to a level commensurate with other people that were above the bottom, and now you've got more people on that bottom rung. You've equalized the poor. You haven't done anything to the rich or even necessarily to people in the upper middle class. You've just fucked everyone who's below them. We don't need that kind of unity. The slow degradation of the Constitution, the slow degradation of U.S. hegemony on the world stage, what ends up happening if the trade lanes of the world are no longer capable of being guaranteed by U.S. naval supremacy? What happens if China does manage to force itself into the Asian theater? Your prices are going to skyrocket, dude. You think they're not going to play hardball? You think there won't be potentially war over such a thing? I do. And keep in mind the Chinese government is part of that same globalism. But they're very, very angry right now because Trump started breaking their toys. They had to pump funny money into their economy for several years there and wait it out while Beijing Biden could be rigged in as asterisk president. At this point, basically what they're offering us for unity is a return to less economic freedom, less liberty in the social or moral sense, and selling you out to corporations that are based in other countries, while starting a bunch of proxy wars on credit that will be used to stamp out any smaller regimes in which a person could actually get ahead. Essentially, any country practicing actual legitimate capitalism will be bombed back to the Stone Age. And countries under socialist models potentially too, or they'll get robbed. Robbed with some trade deal that they force down their throats, terrorist style. That's what's happening right now. I don't want that kind of unity. I want a choice. I want a choice for this nation between going further to the left. I think that'd be a terrible idea, but it's a choice available, having an actual leftist system, or at least like a Nordic system, or becoming populist, which is certainly what I would prefer. Having a U.S. government that represents the people and their best interest, that leaves them alone, by and large, that leaves the Constitution alone, that defends the people of the United States against their foes abroad, and is willing to strike trade deals, but insists that they actually be fair for once, because we don't seem to have been doing that since about the 1980s. That's what I would want for unity. I think that is a unifying message. America First is a good idea. It's the only message that our own government that we buy and pay for should even be using. It is the sole and only message that the U.S. government should be permitted to have. That's about all. Peace out.